Okay. Right, welcome everyone to the Learning and Culture Scrutiny Committee, today 10th of June. May I first remind everyone present that the meeting is being live streamed as well as recorded via the internet, and this recording archived for future viewing. A bit of housekeeping: could all participants please mute themselves when not speaking in order to avoid any background noise or feedback when other participants are speaking. If a participant wishes to speak, can they please put their hand up? They can either do that physically or by using the little hand that's available to everyone, the raise hand function. Please ensure that all debate is raised verbally and not via the chat function for the sake of the recording. Chat function should be only used to highlight any technical issues or to grab my attention or that of Democratic Services officers. If anyone has difficulty hearing or being heard when they are addressing the committee, then they should let the chairman, myself, or the Democratic officer know. If they are using a webcam, they should perhaps try turning that off, as this will help with the broadband or Wi-Fi bandwidth, so at least they can be heard. So that's the housekeeping out the way. So we'll now start the meeting. Firstly, are there any apologies for absence?
No apologies for absence received. All members are present. Okay,
thank you very much. The minutes of the meeting that were held on the 13th of May, would somebody like to propose those?
I'll propose them, yeah.
Okay, seconded?
Second, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, are there, agenda item 3, are there any declarations of interest? No, thank you very much. Okay, we'll now move on to the reports for this evening. Agenda item 4, Esting case studies and effective practice in Vale of Glamorgan schools. Who's going to take that report?
I'm leading on that, Chair. Caris Pritchard from Central South Consortium. Prynhawn da, everybody. Good to see everyone. The purpose of this report is to update members on the effective practice case studies identified in the Vale of Glamorgan schools by Esting since the introduction of the new Common Inspection Framework in September 2017. There'll be two parts to this report. I'll talk you through the brief written reports and I'll make reference to the background information and the overview of the best practice identified in Vale of Glamorgan schools. And then there'll be a presentation from two schools, Cogan Primary and St Cyrig, who will provide us with further information about the best practice case studies that Esting have identified in their schools. I'll make a start by looking at the background information in terms of point 1. In terms of the new Common Inspection Framework, as I mentioned, that was introduced back in September 2017 across all schools in Wales. And there's an overview of the Common Inspection Framework in Appendix 1. Obviously, you've seen that before because obviously we've looked and considered inspection reports and the framework on previous agenda meetings. In terms of the judgments, there's judgments made under 5 inspection areas: standards, well-being and attitudes to learning, teaching and learning experiences, care, support and guidance, and leadership and management. And in terms of those 5 inspection areas, Esting would make a judgment on each area using 4 judgments. It would be either excellent, being very strong, sustained performance and practice; good, being strong features, although minor aspects may require improvement; adequate and needs improvement, where strengths outweigh weaknesses, but important aspects require improvement; and then unsatisfactory and needs urgent improvement. In terms of the schools that have been inspected in the Vale of Glamorgan, there is a list in Appendix 2 in terms of all the schools that have been inspected since 2017 and up until the last inspection in spring 2020. Obviously, at the moment, inspections have been suspended due to COVID, but all the inspection reports that you see in Appendix 2, they have been considered by us on a termly basis up until spring 2020. So when Estyn identify excellent practice in a school, schools are invited to prepare a written case study exemplifying that practice, and that case study is then published by Estyn and shared with other schools. There's also cases where Estyn have identified interesting, innovative practice that they feel would also benefit sharing with the wider audience. And perhaps the inspection area might not have received an excellent judgment in that case. But if Estyn deem for it to be interesting or innovative and worth sharing, they would also invite the school to write a case study to be shared with other schools. But I must emphasise here that it wouldn't relate to any inspection area that receives a lower judgment than good overall. In terms of the Vale of Glamorgan schools, since September 2017, 11 schools in total have been invited by Estyn to write a case study of effective practice. And you've got there, in terms of 2.2, a list of those schools. In total, 12 case studies have been published, and case studies have been published from Oakfield Primary, Cadoxton Primary, Gladstone, Cogan Primary, Ysgol Sant Curig, Ysgol Gymraeg Bro Morgannwg, Cowbridge Comprehensive, Barry Island Primary, and Cogan Nursery. If you turn to Appendix 3, what you have in Appendix 3 is a very brief summary and reference to those case study reports. You'll see for each school where there's been a case study published, the name of the school, the date of inspection, the nature of the effective practice that's been identified, and a very brief description of that practice, and then a link to the actual case study itself. So for all those 12 case studies, you'll be able to access further information and a detailed report about those best practice. And just for you to be aware, 2 case studies have been published by 3 schools in the local authority. So Cadoxton Primary, Cogan Primary and Cogan Nursery have all published 2 case studies. There are 2 schools in the local authority as well that have been invited by Estyn to write best practice case studies, but these have not yet been published. So in terms of All Saints Church in Wales Primary School and Ysgol Sant Barich, they have been invited, they have been written, but they haven't yet been published by Estyn. But if you turn to Appendix 4 in terms of your papers, you will see that there's a reference to the effective practice identified in those both schools, identified there, because it is highlighted in the inspection report where best practice and where schools have been invited to share best practice. So that's it in terms of background. I'm now going to pass on to Sue Seibert to begin with. Sue is the head teacher of Cogan Primary School. And as I mentioned earlier, Cogan was one of the schools where they've identified 2 case studies to be drafted. And the school has written and developed 2 case studies, first of all, in relation to developing innovative learning for pupils, and then the way that the school encourages caring and inclusive learning environment. So I'm now going to pass on to Sue, and she will give you the flavour in terms of her work in those 2 aspects. Diolch yn fawr, Sue.
Diolch, Paris, and thank you for inviting me along this evening. It's really lovely to be able to come and actually celebrate our practice. We were inspected in May 2018, so it does seem a little while ago now, but we were actually delighted with results and wholeheartedly really agreed with the Estin team and their outcomes. And I know that doesn't always happen in schools, but it actually was a really positive experience for us. We were very lucky to get 3 goods and 2 excellents. And our excellence, as Caris has alluded to, is care, support and guidance and leadership and management. So we were really, really delighted with that. But I think the opening statement of our inspection is worth me just sort of reading, because it does really give you a flavour of Cogan Primary School. So if you bear with me while I just read this, and then I will sort of go into a little bit more detail. It starts by saying Cogan Primary School is at the heart of its community. It provides a safe, welcoming and stimulating learning environment for its pupils. The well-respected and highly skilled head teacher leads the school confidently. She encourages her experienced and established staff to research and try out new approaches, while at the same time maintaining learning experience of high quality for pupils. This enables nearly all pupils to make at least good progress during their time at school and supports more able pupils to achieve high standards, particularly in writing. Most pupils become confident young citizens who respect others, understand and celebrate diversity and enjoy learning. And we were absolutely delighted with this, because our motto is to celebrate success and encourage effort. And we really felt that that did, reflect our school. So leading on from that, we were asked to write our 2 effective practice papers for care, support and guidance and leadership and management. So that was actually an exciting prospect for us to do that and share our practice. We did have 2 recommendations, and again we agreed with inspectors. They asked that we raise standards in Welsh oracy in Key Stage 2, and also improve pupils' ability to influence and lead their own learning. And our Llais curriculum, that's our new curriculum for Wales, voice curriculum, was very much in the infancy at that time. But those 2 recommendations have given us focus and sort of encouraged us to sort of build on those areas. So, that was great for us to be able to work with, work on those areas. So the first paper, Care, Support and Guidance Judgment, that was excellent. And in some ways, both papers cross over. You can't really sort of divorce one from the other. But they recognised that there was improved standards and well-being throughout the school, and that the learning culture has given staff the confidence to share approaches that results in better opportunities for pupils. So to put that into context, they recognised our caring community and the excellent working relationships between staff, pupils, parents and the wider community that fostered the highly inclusive environment based on mutual care and respect. And they also recognised our hearing resource base. We have a hearing resource base that we can take up to 10 children from across the Vale. And they felt that that was a particular strength, whereby the children seamlessly integrate into school life. And they thought this was a long-standing feature. And in terms of the provision for children across the Vale, that these children often make good or often excellent progress against their individual starting points. So again, that was a real plus for us and something to be celebrated. Some of the things that, we sort of foster and are part of the strategies we use, there's very much everyone is involved and everyone participates. And it's easy to say that, but as a school of 209 as we are now, that is something that we foster, and we make sure everybody gets on board with all that goes on in school. Some of the initiatives that we used were such as Guardian Angels, where we would link up our reception and Year 6 children so that they would be reading buddies, and if we were out on trips or excursions, they would actually partner up. They particularly liked that because it meant that it built the self-esteem and also the relationships across the school. So that was really, really important. Also, how the teacher of the deaf operates a reverse integration method. This is where small groups are taken out from mainstream because our hearing impaired children are actually part of a class. But on some occasions, it's nice to take a small group out and give that pre-tutoring and post-tutoring. And that they felt that that was a real strength across the school. And it also, in having our hearing resource base, develops this really caring ethos that permeates right across the school. So they were very impressed with that. We also have strong school values. Each month we have a different value, and that's linked with our assemblies and activities, and that keeps everybody on board. And indeed, we sort of use it to sort of model behaviours right across the school as well. Use of buddies is a really strong part of our school. I mean, obviously COVID has, prevented that a little bit lately in terms of crossing of bubbles, but we will get back there as soon as we can. But reading partnerships, peer supporters that help out on the playground, and all manner of sorts of activities, as well as our slice groups where the children actually buddy up, and it goes across the school community. That's been a real strong area. We also use our parents as best we can. We have 18% coming from ethnic minorities, and where we can, we bring parents in to share their cultures and their religions and the festivals. We make the best of that, and that was also recognised. Diversity recognised as being a really strong point. We made a film of our hearing resource base, and that got shared across the cluster in assemblies in our St Cyrus cluster. And also more recently, we've had diversity picture book awards and our biodiversity picture book award, which has been a huge national initiative whereby authors send in their books and they take part in a book awards modelled on a normal book award, and the children get to read and then choose a short list, and then we get a winner. And the first diversity award, we had the visiting author in, and a community picnic, and all took part in that, which was great. We've also played quite a big part in the Welsh Heritage Schools Initiative. We've had several projects, local history projects, that have involved the whole, classes or the whole school, where we've had dress-up days and we've brought in the community, and that has been a real celebration as well, and improved on in learning and teaching. So we very much enjoyed that, and in fact we've won a couple of prizes and made really important links with the Seroptimist Society, who come in and help with reading as well. So it's been a really lovely community event. And as well as our charity work, we've developed global citizenship through our charity work, which is an important feature of our school, an example of which is the toilet twinning, as well as all the other sort of local charities that we support. We've also led the Creative Schools projects, and that again has developed teamwork across the schools. The first one that we did was we had a songwriter and a musician in, and we wrote our own version of James and the Giant Peach, and that was amazing because the children performed in Penarth Pier Pavilion, and that was really good, and again bringing the whole school together. So, we always ask ourselves the so what question. So what was the impact of the work in this particular area? So standards of behaviour are very high. There's an inclusive culture across the school, which this positively impacts on learning and standards. Excellent communication skills and techniques thrive across the school. increased friendships across all ages and across the school, which we feel is a really important part of our school, where all pupils feel valued members of the community and have positive attitudes to their learning and school life. And there's a real sense of togetherness and inclusivity, and I think Estin inspectors saw that in the fact that this helps pupils feel secure and enhances their learning. So that was our first paper. And our second paper then focused on leadership and management, so encouraging a caring and inclusive learning environment. And, you know, just sort of giving a bit of background to that, they felt that there was a proportionate and effective environment of professional learning and reflective practice. And, you know, I'll quote this here, sort of staff are led by a highly skilled head teacher who has created an ethos based on trust. As a result, the leadership structure has significantly shaped the care, support and guidance and given staff the confidence to innovate and share practice that continues to impact on better learning opportunities for pupils and staff. I mean, I was delighted to have those comments from Estin, but it's very much a team effort. I'm very lucky to have a very supportive and caring team who are willing to try new things and innovate, and that really takes our school forward. So, you know, not just when Estin are looking at us, but, you know, into the future as well. And they recognise, and we sort of highlighted this, that each member of staff has a significant voice in shaping the curriculum and that their contributions are listened to and valued. So in thinking about the background, we've tried to have this inclusive culture and vision that enables everybody within the school to work together to improve standards and well-being. The key, we feel, is clear lines of communication and an awareness of raising and secures the commitment of all staff to have pride and purpose in what they do. So again, it comes back to teamwork. And for example, we try and have a measured and sensible approach when we're putting new strategies and innovations into practice. We say that we co-organise them. We never take things wholesale. We make them our own and we use the best bits. And this certainly has helped us in developing our new curriculum for Wales, our Llais curriculum. And it's something that we continue to do. But there's also a well-established, highly effective sort of look at strategic planning. We have very focused priorities for improvement, but making sure that they're manageable and proportionate and sustainable. And I also try and make sure that I deploy staff so that I can, you know, really use them to their best strengths across the school. And I think this is also something that, you know, helps us achieve what we want to achieve. So some of the things that we've done is we've made sure that leaders are able to come together and reflect on practice. We use different leadership styles as appropriate in making sure that we have effective teams that work together. Staffing structure is key for me, making sure that the staff have capacity to be creative and innovative. And an example of this is our approach to taking the foundation phase philosophy into year 3, which we did in 2018. And so whereby our first 2 terms in year 3 are very much foundation phase based, and then they move more into a transition term in the summer in readiness for year 4. And this has made a huge impact on standards. Everybody had come together to make this happen. But those focus groups have been, you know, absolutely key in raising standards. The other thing that we did in terms of sharing practice was we adopted something called the Leading Lesson Study. This is where teams support each other in phases and the focus is on what the children are learning. So one teacher would lead the learning and do the teaching, and then the other teachers would be focusing on the children's what they were learning, and they would talk to the learners afterwards to see how they accessed that lesson. So it sort of turned the observation round on its head, but it made it a lot more exciting and less sort of pressured really for the teachers. But we've seen really good results from that, and Estin really liked that approach. We also have clear and effective management systems. I try where I can to make sure they are open and fair and equitable, and that we do celebrate our successes, but we also unpick what doesn't work. We're not afraid to do that and share what doesn't work and then make improvements. And where possible, we try and develop networks in terms of working with other schools across the cluster, across the consortium and further afield, doing our research and again making sure that we use the best bits to make a difference. We also developed a learning buddy system, which Estin very much liked, where the children actually share their work, they link up with another class, and they talk about what was challenging in their work, what was their favourite bits, what they found that they were successful at. And that is a real joy to see that in action, because it was also a way of teachers monitoring and listening to learners in being able to gauge what they'd learned. And also effective works carried out with the governing body. We had a restructure of our governing body in that our curriculum committee meet, and they're really focused on curriculum issues and developments, and that has been really successful in feeding back to a full governing body. And again, the so what question. Teachers research that develops innovative practice while maintaining high quality learning experience for children. We have confident children who achieve good or better standards. We have a shared professional learning culture where everyone is listened to and valued, and a climate based on mutual respect, openness and trust, and a sense of togetherness and sustainability. And I think that is really, really important. We've shared our practice far and wide. We've been a Pathfinder school. We've worked with our school improvement group, cluster, Central South Consortium and further afield. I've spoken on the NPQH, that's the qualification for head teachers, and I'm also a coach for newly qualified head teachers for Central South Consortium. And our Teacher of the Deaf supports the local authority and cluster, and there's considerable school-to-school working. But, you know, just to finish, we were absolutely delighted with our outcome. It's been a real celebration for us, and we are enjoying our new methodologies with our Llais curriculum, and it is going from strength to strength. So our future at Cogan Primary School is looking very bright indeed. So thank you for listening. I don't know if anyone's got any questions, or whether Caris would take questions after Rodri as well. I don't mind.
Shall we go straight to Rodri and then any general questions? Is that okay, Sue? But diolch yn fawr iawn, a very comprehensive overview there. And as you say, it's an opportunity to celebrate, isn't it? The good practice that's been highlighted, the good and excellent practice that's been highlighted by Estin. So diolch yn fawr. I'll now pass over for a second school now, and Rodri Jones, who is the head teacher of Ysgol St Curig, is going to be providing an overview of their effective practice in relation to well-being activities to nurture pupils. So Rodri, diolch yn fawr.
Diolch, Caris. Prynawn da, everyone. Yes, my name is Rodri Jones, and I'm the head teacher at Ysgol Gymraeg St Curig here in Barry. I was appointed head in January 2020, just before the carnage of the pandemic hit. So I don't know if it's good timing or bad timing, I'm not sure. But I was previously the deputy head of the school when we had our last inspection. So Caris has asked me tonight to give you all a brief presentation about the case study that Estin had asked us to produce following our inspection during the 2018-19 academic year, which seems like a lifetime ago now. Estin gave the school an overall judgment of excellent for 3 areas: well-being and attitudes to learning, care, support and guidance, and leadership and management. Estyn then asked us to write about, as Caris mentioned, how we used well-being activities in school to nurture our pupils. So what they actually said was that staff at Ysgol Gymraeg Sant Curig have excellent working relationships with their pupils. This helps to create a learning environment where pupils' confidence and independence are developed. Pupils' well-being and attitudes to learning are excellent, and pupils show high levels of motivation, interest, and pride in their work. So to give you a little bit of background, Sant Curig is situated right in the centre of town. Welsh is the main language of the school, although I would say roughly 90% of the children come from families where Welsh isn't spoken regularly at home. We currently have 481 children in school, so it's quite a big school, between the ages of 3 and 11. 17.5% at the moment is the current percentage of children receiving free school meals, which I'd say is probably the highest it's been for quite some time. Now, our journey started a few years before the inspection when our catchment area changed. As you probably all are aware, the growth in Welsh medium education in the town has meant that we now have defined catchment areas. So therefore, rather than have children from all areas of Barry, the focus of our catchment at Sant Curig now are the town families and those families living in the docks area of Barry. So there's a slight change, a slight shift there. And with that shift, we began noticing a slight change in behaviour and the emotional needs of our children as they entered the school at a young age. We noticed more children coming from broken homes, and also we were receiving a large increase in police protection notices, these PPNs. So any incidents of domestic violence, for example, at home on weekends or in evenings, we would then be notified by the police of these incidents. And we felt that this was increasing and obviously having a negative effect on the emotional well-being of the pupils of Sant Curig. So we feel that the school is the only constant that many of these children get in their lives, and that we have a responsibility to our most vulnerable pupils. Every child, we feel, has a right to be happy, to feel looked after and cared for, to receive positive experiences at our school. Unfortunately, some children struggle to cope emotionally with what is expected of them in school. So to begin with, at Sant Curig, we put a strong emphasis on our own well-being as staff and support network, and we feel that this puts us as staff members in a strong position then to support our pupils in school. So once we looked at putting our own well-being first and looking at training staff in attachment disorders and in trauma specifically, we were then able to put in place a range of well-being activities to support and nurture our pupils in school and to give them opportunity to develop life skills. So in Estyn's report, there were 4 areas of support that they focused on and reported back positively on. So I'll run you through those 4 now briefly. And as Caris mentioned, if you want to ask any further questions at the end, I'd be more than happy to answer. So firstly, we have at Sant Curig our Cool Wedi Cinio initiative. So this is a cool done after lunch, if you like, roughly translated. So this is a sort of mindfulness tool. It's bespoke, it's created by staff at the school, and it helps children to settle down and prepare mentally and emotionally for the afternoon session. We felt that children were bringing problems in from outside into the classroom after lunch. And this was not only eating into learning time, but also the children weren't in a good place to access learning in the classroom in the afternoon. So what we did was we created 9 different mindfulness tracks, if you like, where a staff member sort of talked soothingly over calm music in the background. This lasted anything between sort of 8 and 12 minutes. We then recorded this professionally in Cardiff in a studio, and then obviously we had 9 separate tracks, which we'd play then as soon as the children arrived back in the classroom. So as they arrived into the classroom, they would make themselves comfortable, lie down, sit comfortably, they would close their eyes, try and relax, and then they get transported to a different place for a short while. Staff felt that this then allowed the children to prepare mentally for the afternoon session. It helps them sort of bring them down after a busy, sometimes chaotic lunchtime. So we collected data and completed questionnaires from children and from staff and found the initiative to be incredibly successful. We then shared this practice with all the Welsh schools within the 5 consortia. They were invited to some training at Llanqurig. Many schools took part in this training, and they were given access to these tracks, and then they would use them in their own setting. We had very positive feedback from Estyn here, as we could clearly show the impact and the positive impact it had on the children at our school. But more importantly, the evaluation sheets we gathered from other schools, then we could demonstrate how this impacted positively on other schools as well, which is always something they look very favourably at. So secondly, then we started what we call Clwb Dechrau Da. So again, roughly translated, it's a good start to the day club, if you like. So here we identified pupils that may need time at the start of the day to talk to someone before going into class where there's lots of other children, because often a class teacher would have a whole class to deal with, up to 30 children, obviously. And we were concerned that some children would carry a worry or a concern into class. And as a result, they wouldn't be able to work as well as usual, or maybe reach their full potential. So we opened up Clwb Dechrau Da, which we had a room in school which we used, and that gave them a chance in a smaller group, if they wanted to speak to one of the trained staff members who were there. Often it would give us a chance to give these children some breakfast, or maybe a drink, a cup of tea first thing in the morning, a glass of juice, and they would obviously take the registration here as well. Once this session was complete, the children then would return to their classrooms, usually around quarter past 9, and then the staff would ensure that they would check in on those children during the school day, especially if a child had sort of said anything that was bothering them, or had got a worry off their chest. The staff would make sure that they would check in with that child then during the day. So that was our Clwb Dechrau Da. The third initiative we have is our Elsa support network, and I'm sure this isn't any different to many schools within our authority. So Elsa stands for Emotional Literacy Support Assistance. So here, children are grouped according to need. Usually in our school, it's roughly anything between 4 and 8 children at the most, I would say. Low self-esteem, lacking in confidence, anger, frustration, sometimes maybe a bereavement in the family. These are the types of need that would be identified and would require some Elsa support. These pupils are identified, for those interested, by need from staff feedback or staff concerns. And also we have in the Vale something called Selfie, which is a tool which is able to identify some need in children that maybe isn't spotted by school members. This data enables us to target specific children for support. The Elsa trained adult then would prepare activities, games involving the need of the children in that group. And it's supposed to be a short-term initiative, no more than a term, looking normally 6 to 8 weeks. Occasionally they may run over a term depending on the need of the child, but it's also a short, sharp intervention to try and give the child support to enable them to go back into the classroom and to access their learning, and to be in a better place emotionally to be able to do that. The staff create their own questionnaires then to look at the effectiveness of one session or sessions, and to see if they need to be adapted or for different groups. So almost like a self-evaluation tool that we've personalised in school. And then finally, we have our Clwb Cwtch, lovely Welsh word, Cwtch. It's our nurture club in school, and here our most vulnerable children get access to this club. Those children who have troubled backgrounds, very low self-esteem, and often those children where the Elsa support that we've given them isn't enough. That term and a bit isn't enough for these children, so then they would then make access of our Clwb Cwtch. And here, they would come out of class for 1 or 2 sessions a week, and then they would get the opportunity to develop life skills such as cooking, sewing, crafting, and artwork possibly. These sessions are run by our support staff, both in the foundation phase and in Key Stage 2, and often these sessions would involve parents of those children, and occasionally the parents have run the sessions, particularly craft sessions, which is really nice. We felt that this strengthened the relationship between us and the parents, and also gave the children and their parents some quality time together in school. Often these children have siblings, and sometimes they're fighting for attention at home. So having the opportunities in school to spend some time with parents is invaluable. So those are the 4 main interventions that Estyn focused on, and we were lucky enough to have these in place and embedded by the time that we had our unexpected visit from Estyn back in 2018-19. As you may know, the time scale for inspections has changed over the years. When I first started teaching, it was a year to 18 months sometimes, where you'd wait and wait for the inspections to take place. These days, it's a matter of weeks, and it's very difficult, impossible almost, to hide anything from them. So we were delighted that Estyn recognised all the hard work within the school and what we'd put in place to support the emotional well-being of our most vulnerable pupils. I'd say the biggest compliment that I can give my staff is that these support mechanisms have kept operating through COVID-19. Obviously, we've had to adapt them slightly. Postcards sent out to these children during lockdown and visits to homes, food parcels, one-to-one and group sessions done via Teams. We invited these children into our hubs during the lockdown periods, and then organised timetables so that if they were in the hubs, we'd make sure that their trusted adults would be timetabled at the same time as them, so they knew they had someone they trusted and they could talk to if they needed to when they came to school. And then, of course, on the return to school, the celebrated return to school, we still offer the interventions at the moment, even though they're slightly changed and slightly modified, because obviously we have to keep children in their bubbles. So, for example, with the Club Dechrau Da now, what we do now is, rather than gather together in mixed bubbles in one room, the staff will meet the children by the school gates and walk with them into school and give them an opportunity maybe to mention something, and then they'll go back in later on and check in with those children then in the class, which I think is a nice way of doing it. So they know they've always got that contact when they get to school in the morning. Our club cut still runs. It's only once a week at the moment, and obviously, like I mentioned, usually you'd have sort of foundation phase and key stage 2, but now they're obviously in their bubbles, but we're still maintaining those sessions. The Elsa groups still run, again in their own bubbles, and maybe not as often as before, but they're still there, and they also know that they can access the staff members if they need to. And obviously the mindfulness sessions, our Cool Wedi Cinio sessions, they were in class anyway, so they continue as normal. With a strain of continuous lockdowns and the sort of the fear of the virus, if you like, spreading, we felt it was vital that we started up these interventions as quickly as possible at St Cerrig in order to support these children. And we do feel that the LSA-led initiatives, because it is led by the LSAs in school, our support staff, our phenomenal support staff at St Cerrig, they lead these initiatives, and they've put these things they've put in place to ensure that the children are in the best place possible to access their learning. And this, of course, led to Estyn recognising the pupils' well-being and attitudes to learning as excellent, and that they show high levels of motivation, interest, and pride in their work. And these two things go together. For the children to have high levels of motivation, interest and pride in their work, they must be in the best place emotionally to be able to do this. And we feel, by putting these initiatives in place and giving the children time to talk, we feel that we give them the best chance that we can to do this. So, sorry, it's brief, and I'm more than happy to answer questions, but I wish my LSAs were here to give you more information, because they're in the best place on the front line to give you more information, but we were all very proud of them at St Cerrig.
Oh, diolch yn fawr, Rhodri. And before I pass over to you, Chair, can I just formally thank Rhodri, from the head teacher of St Cerrig, and Sue from Cogan Primary for the inspirational talk tonight. It's been great to hear the excellent practice, and it's very much celebrating that excellent practice with members here. So diolch yn fawr iawn to both of you for your time, for your preparation, and very much diolch to the team behind you as well, because you've both made references to the team of people. So thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you very much for that, and well, thank you to the three of you for the presentation, and especially to the two from the schools, because you go on. I've gone on to the the links that are in the report, but it's when you hear it, it really brings it out. Something on paper doesn't really capture the whole thing, but what you've done, what you said today, I think has been inspirational and very, very important. So I can see that Councillor Burnett wants to, has got her hand up. I can't see anyone else at the moment, but I'll look through. So, Liz, if you want to go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to add my thanks to Sue and Rodri for coming in, and to everybody that's mentioned in this report. It never ceases to amaze me, the work that's going on in our schools across the Vale, and I'm in the hugely fortunate position that I not only get frequent updates from the education team, I managed to go out and visit. Hopefully I can do that more now that that we're sort of relaxing some of the measures. I've been out to a few recently, but also I can attend head teacher meetings, so I get to know what's going on there as well. We've got the stuff that's covered by the ESTIN framework, but I think that we also need to recognise the support for our children during the pandemic, the amount of support that our schools have provided, the way in which they've turned literally 360 degrees in no time at all to be able to change their practice. That's not only from a well-being perspective, keeping contact with vulnerable children, making sure that they and their families were okay. And also we're going to hear more about the adopting practices in terms of distance and blended learning, which has been a huge learning curve for all our schools. And they, things that work for one don't work for other, and they work very, very, very well with the consortium and with each other. Many schools supporting each other in that. So huge thanks from me, and I'll also say thanks when we get in. I know we've got some head teacher meetings coming up as well. I do have to say, I do have to recognise it, and he's probably not going to. He really did. Pete from St Cyrus did really get the rough end of the whatever it is at the end, at the start of the pandemic. I think you were probably the last school, as everything was starting to go into chaos, to be inspected, and I know just how much you've been doing for the children and all the developments that have been happening in St Cyrus. So I'm absolutely confident that they'll come back as soon as possible. There will be some excellence, and we'll be hearing your case studies as well. I think we have to recognise that. I've often felt, and I think I've said it in the past, that scrutiny can be quite internally focused. And so we look at the machinations of the council and what our policies are and how that's all going. And I think that what we've seen today is how productive it is to hear from schools what's happening in them. And at the moment, it's difficult. Years ago, Scrutiny used to go out and meet in schools, but at the moment, that's not possible. But I'm just wondering whether or not Scrutiny would welcome schools becoming more involved and telling committee about what they're doing, what progress they're making, and what challenges they're facing as well. And I just thought I'd throw that into the mix, but I'll finish there. But huge thanks from me, Chair.
Okay, thank you for that. I think, yeah, it would be helpful for schools being more involved, because at the end of the day, that's why we're here as a committee. What we're interested in are the schools and the students and pupils within those schools. So yeah, that's very good. I've got two more people have indicated. I see the Vice Chairman and then Councillor Perk. So Rhiannon, do you want to go first?
Thank you very much. I was really pleased to hear both of the reports. As someone who's fairly recently retired from teaching, I know that people outside education think that children turn up clean, bright, freshly scrubbed every morning, ready to learn, properly fed, with all of the support that the home background should be offering them. And we know inside the education system that this is not the case. And it's very gratifying to see entire systems being put in place to offer these children support so they can take the best advantage of the education that you're offering them. and that teachers are prepared to do this. I mean, I had a friend of mine who did an exchange in a French school where basically as a teacher you turn up, you teach the children, the discipline is done by somebody who walks around and extracts naughty children from the classroom, disciplines them and then sends them back in again. Whereas here we have teachers who have become prepared to be teachers, counsellors, substitute parents, and it's tremendously, I mean, it's very gratifying as a teacher to be able to do all of these things, but it means that you go home from work and you are completely exhausted and you're lying awake at 4 o'clock in the morning thinking about the best way to get child A to engage with the topic, or child B and whether or not they had enough tea, because you are so, you know, dramatically and inextricably entwined with all of the children that you teach, particularly in primary schools, because you're seeing the same 30 children day in, day out. So I can't express how, you know, gratified I am that these programmes are in place and that you're overseeing them, because it's so important. I'm particularly thinking about, I mean, I was a governor on COVID for a long time, and I know the kind of children that go there. Not all of them are going to have the background that will allow them to access every single aspect of the curriculum. I don't know so much about Ysgol San Cirig, and it's interesting that your staff have been able to respond to a differing set of children that come in. And I think also people assume that when children come into school, their parents are wholeheartedly behind them and will support anything that the school does. And we know that that's not the case either, that some parents found school difficult themselves and that they've passed that on to their children, and it becomes a real battle to get a child to engage. I know, having taught English for years and years, which means that you see the same reluctant learner every single day, every single week, and they present that attitude every single time that you see them. So I've nothing but praise, and I would love to see these programmes rolled out everywhere. That, you know, I mean, you've offered the case study to us, but I hope that these case studies are being disseminatedly as widely as possible. I would say go out and preach, but on the other hand, you won't be in your schools doing your good work. So, you know, we have to balance that one, don't we? But no, it's very gratifying to hear all of this, and I'm sure I'm speaking for everybody who's nodding around here that you know, that this kind of thing is going on. I've nothing but praise. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you for that, Councillor Perks.
Thank you. I was really interested to hear both of the reports and the various initiatives that you have going forward to sort of help children be ready for learning and to sort of achieve sort of, you know, what they're capable of. I was particularly like the idea of the lunchtime, you sort of when they go back into class after lunch, that they have that sort of calm down time to be able to be ready to learn and stuff like that, and that it's gone out and been used in different areas. But yes, thank you both for your reports. Really interesting to actually hear what's going on in the schools, and I would definitely like to see more teachers coming along to the scrutinies and telling us what they're actually doing in the schools as well. So thank you both.
Okay, thank you very much. I can't see there's any other virtual hands up. If anyone's having difficulty but wants to contribute.
Chairman,
Yeah.
Sorry, Kath here from Democratic. Just wanted to make a note, for the sake of anyone watching the recording retrospectively, really. Councillor Perks did actually put in the chat that she's declared an interest as a governor of Halton Primary. So I just wanted to make that clear, as viewers can't see the chat.
Okay, thank you very much. So unless, no, it doesn't seem to anyone else wants to say anything. So can I once again thank everyone that's contributed this afternoon, and thank you to everyone throughout, you know, throughout the Vale schools for all the efforts they put in. There's a straightforward recommendation that we note the examples of effective practice which have been identified by Estin. Well, I think can perhaps you just add to that the committee's thanks for all, as I say, for all the work that's done, not just in the schools that feature here, but in all schools throughout the Vale. Are members happy with that?
Happy.
Yes, okay, thank you very much. Moving on then to agenda item 5, development in blended and remote stroke distance learning practice available in open schools. Well, that's a bit of a mouthful, so So if we, who's taking this report? Sorry.
I'm leading on this one as well.
You're back
Chair,
again.
yes.
Yes.
But I've also got a company of 2 other schools who'll be providing some feedback as well. So the purpose of this report is to update members on development in blended and remote learning practices in school, particularly during the autumn term this academic year and the spring term 2021. There is going to be, very much like the first report, 2 parts to this. I'll take you through the overview in terms of the written report, which is in Appendix 2, and then there'll be 2 presentations from schools. First of all, from Wickham Macross Church in Wales Primary, and then from St Cyrus School, that will outline their practices and their experiences in terms of blended and remote learning. So I'll make a start by, I'll go straight to the report in Appendix A. And in terms of the context on page 1, just to report that this is a summary of findings really from meetings undertaken between improvement partners in Central South Consortium and schools during autumn 2020 and spring 2021. And as you can imagine, there was a strong focus there on blended learning and continuity of learning, and also going back to what we've heard earlier really, comment on learner well-being and engagement. So that was a regular focus, and this provides us with a snapshot of findings for this period. And you will find in the report as well some examples of cameos from schools, just to give you a flavour on a school level, and there'd also be lots of references to examples of how schools have addressed key practices. I'm not going to go through the report word by word, excuse me, because I'm aware you've had the written report in advance, but I'll just draw your attention to key things. In terms of autumn term to begin with, 2020, that was very much a focus on upskilling teachers, pupils and parents in relation to their skills in terms of learning platforms and familiarisation with key tools that they were going to be using. So in terms of staff, there was a lot of professional learning development, lots of action research undertaken in schools to support them to develop and use these tools in the classroom, and that resulted in an increased confidence by staff in delivering remote learning. And you've got a case study there in terms of reference to Palmerston Primary, for example, where they undertook action research work on assessment and feedback practices to pupils using online tools. So there's a link there as well if you would like to see further information about that work. Again, with pupils, it was consolidating their skills, making sure they were familiar with the learning platforms and digital programmes. Sometimes homework tasks were set based on the programmes to make sure they were familiar with the routines and what was expected. And the example here, for example, is Wickham Macross, and you'll see a reference to this in a film shortly about how they operated a flipped classroom model where they were encouraging some pupils to work independently to develop their resilience and independent skills in the classroom, and that had an impact in terms of their confidence in using particular learning tools and platform. There was also support provided to parents. For example, Pendoilan Church in Wales Primary, they provided a tutorial for parents in the autumn term, and again just trying to make sure everybody was familiar with the platforms and their functions. So it was very much in the autumn term a period of consolidation, and in a sense the impact of that work can be seen in the spring term when you're looking at the provision. So in terms of page 2 onwards, there's reference to provision. And first of all, just a few things to point out. In terms of schools, what we have found in terms of the spring term is that schools are making appropriate use of their learning platforms, the tools that they were using to support the learning. Foundation phase, many schools were using Seesaw as a tool, and then in Key Stage 2 and the secondary schools, most schools were using Microsoft Teams or Google Classroom. In the primary sector as well, there was a strong focus on the provision for well-being, literacy and numeracy during the spring term. There was also a focus on topic and thematic work. And as a result, what pupils had was access to a broad range of activities that aligned actually very closely to their experiences at school. Another clear feature in terms of the spring term was the increased use of live contact with pupils in most primary schools. It's got to emphasise quite clearly here that the provision was quite varied across schools because it depended very much on the needs of pupils, parents and staff. So it wasn't exactly the same across all schools, and they were taking account of the pupils' needs and parental needs. But in most cases, there was live contact with pupils. It was being used for catch-up and well-being sessions. A number of schools also introduced live teaching as part of that provision, particularly to support literacy and numeracy. And then there were some examples as well of schools incorporating more creative and thematic work as part of that live provision. There were also drop-in sessions provided for pupils during the day, so staff, were online and pupils could contact and, sort of ask questions, or if they were unclear about something, they could ask for further advice. And also live sessions, particularly in primary schools, was used to support acts of collective worship and celebration events on a weekly basis. In a few primary schools where live contact was limited, the schools there made effective use of an asynchronous pre-recorded materials created by the schools. Many parents in those schools felt that that was their preferred provision because it enabled them to have more flexibility to support the children with their work at a time that was convenient for them. So again, that's sort of a reference of schools making sure that they were trying to address the needs of parents and pupils in particular. In terms of secondary schools, particularly during the fire break back in November and from January onwards, there was a significant increase in the use of live teaching. Again, it was variable and based on pupils' needs, staff needs and parental needs. In some schools, such as Bro Morgannwg, St Cyrus, most of the lessons there were live contact with pupils. And in some of the other schools, there was more of a blended approach where there was a mix of live lessons, webinars and time for personal responses to tasks. We've heard Rhodri already make reference to well-being and how that continued during lockdown. So you can see there's a section here that outlines, in terms of the strong focus that school had on well-being as part of the remote and blended learning provision, and a list of examples there, including telephone calls, promoting well-being activities such as mindfulness sessions, physical education activities, promoting outdoor learning activities, range of extracurricular activities for pupils. Rhodri made mention of Elsa, so again, well-being strategies such as Elsa and Thrive that were being used previously were now happening online or targeted pupils invited to the school. There was also opportunities provided for pupils to meet socially online. So you've got an example there of Gwenford Church of Wales Primary. They created a Google Playground group for pupils to socialise in a more informal manner. And Victoria Primary, in response to an online, sort of online questionnaire, they found that a number of pupils were lonely. So they created an online friendship group for pupils. So that just gives you a flavour in terms of well-being. There's some cameos included as well. I'll just make reference to St Barrick, for example. They decided on a particular week in February that they would suspend their usual live lessons, and what they decided to have was what they call Bwrlwm Barrick. And it was a range of well-being and creativity sessions for pupils to join, and pupils signed up for at least 2 sessions on a daily basis with different teachers, with different pupils in different groups, and it was very well received by both pupils, teachers and parents. There's also been a focus, Roger mentioned well-being of staff at the start of his case study presentation. The same here, there's been a strong focus as well on the well-being of staff through things like WhatsApp group, regular briefings, meetings, professional learning opportunities, focusing on well-being and social events. And there's a reference there to a daith and their, regular contact, weekly contact, face-to-face check-in via video calls to make sure that staff, all members of staff, were okay in the current circumstances. There was also a reference and a strong focus on leaders' well-being as part of the improvement partners work as well. So again, that was usually the starting point for any discussion with head teachers, and to ensure that their that their well-being was a focus as well. Similarly, with additional learning needs pupils, there's been a strong focus on this particular group as well as vulnerable learners. And again, I'm repeating what's been said already in terms of some of the strategies that are down here, but you can see reference to things like daily phone calls, check-in meetings with key members of staff, differentiated work being provided online for the pupils, video calls between the one-to-one support or with key members of staff to support pupils, targeted sessions being provided in school, catch-up meetings being held with pupils and their parents, home visits, and additional resources being loaned out to pupils as well. And the cameo here is of the work that Stanwell School have undertaken in terms of a successful online learning group, which includes a number of pupils who were poor attenders in school due to school-induced anxiety. So it's a very, very small group of 12 pupils who regularly meet online and have their own classroom online and interact with a key member of staff on 1 or 2 subjects that they enjoy, and have a daily contact with that member of staff to try and promote them and to engage further with the work in terms of their school. And in terms of the impact there, it's been successful, and there has been further engagement by this specific group of pupils with school life. There's then a reference in the report on page 5 to engagement. And what we found during the spring term is that school had a clearer focus on tracking the engagement of pupils and in terms of the engagement figures itself. So there were also quite a number of schools that were very clear about what was acceptable in terms of learner engagement, and if anything wasn't acceptable, they would follow that up, and to make sure that pupils would be engaging. So again, a number of cameos here. There's referenced example to Llandoch Primary. They developed a tracker that leaders, the head and the deputy were focusing on a regular basis to see who was submitting work, who was attending the live sessions, who was accessing the pre-recorded sessions, and then they were focusing in terms of breakdown of key vulnerable groups for them, such as pupils who were eligible for free school meals, ALN pupils, and pupils who have English as an additional language. So the schools were responding to that data and then following up with the parents. You've also then got Pencoitra. There's a reference to Pencoitra's work on page 6 of the report about their engagement tracker that they've used with students and parents. So this was information in terms of pupils' engagement in all lessons was forwarded to the heads of year. But the parents were also provided feedback on a fortnightly basis regarding engagement, and then they had the opportunity as well as part of that process to provide feedback to the school on the provision provided.
Caris, your audio has gone for me. I think you've muted yourself.
Sorry, I am sorry. I think my hand must be moving when I'm talking, so I do apologise.
No
I'm on page 6 of the report. Is that sort of in terms of if, you know, sort of there was a case of low engagement, you've got examples there in terms of how schools followed up with parents, with pupils, to ensure that pupils did engage where possible with the learning that was being offered. And the cameo there is of Oakfield Primary, and you can see a very clear graduated response there and the no excuses culture they had. And you can see the impact that that resulted, because in a sense, back in January, only 55% of the pupils accessed the online learning. And by February half term, that figure was between 88% and 92% of pupils. There was also support for parents in terms of information sharing events, tutorials, guidance materials, socially distanced visits even if needed. And again, you've got a list of different activities there. Halton had a task and finish group where parents, governors were involved in providing feedback to the school in terms of the blended learning offer. They also had a special email account from the tech team, as they were called, to support parents with any problems. Victoria had an online parent wellbeing forum. Cogan Nursery, they ensured that any stories that were chosen were available in different languages, so that videos were shared with parents and they had access then and were able to engage and support the pupils in that nursery school with their learning. There's a reference in terms of Oakfield and Cadixton's celebration of learning there, which was very much in place of the usual parents' evening, and they had conferences where the pupils met with a teacher and the parent, and they talked about their work and what they found successful and what they needed to improve. And we'll see a similar example actually with Wickham Across coming up in terms of their electronic learning journals as a way of communication with parents. So obviously there's been a lot ongoing in schools during this time, and there's been a strong focus, particularly leaders now, have had a strong focus on self-evaluation and quality assurances in relation to the provision provided. So there's been a lot of informal discussions with pupils, parents and carers. There's been discussions with staff. There's been questionnaires undertaken, there's been engagement, looking at engagement figures and trackers, there's been scrutiny of teachers' planning, scrutiny of pupils' work, there's been attendance also at live sessions and online lessons. So there's been a lot of work there, you know, so to make sure that pupils are having the best provision possible. And what you have got on page 8 is a list of how some schools have responded to that feedback. You know, and have adapted their provision. So, for example, in some school, it's been an increase in live contact time. In other schools, like Ysgol Gymraeg Bro Morgannwg, they had a reduction of screen time because they had concerns about screen fatigue, which was being raised by pupils. Some have increased or decreased the length of any live sessions. There's been an increase in wellbeing activities. So, for example, St Helens Roman Catholic Primary, they introduced Wellbeing Wednesday. There's been also some refining of the feedback processes to pupils. You know, sort of when teachers were looking at pupils' work, ensuring that pupil were able to hear, and we'll see some example of that in a minute, but hear some comments and have time to refine and respond to those teachers' comments as well. And in terms of, as an example, on page 9, in relation to a Welsh medium school, for example, Ysgol Dewi Sant, they made sure that they filmed bilingual presentations to parents, so to ensure that all parents and carers could support their children with their work. Because as Rodri mentioned, it's another school where it's a Welsh medium school, but the high percentage of pupils don't speak Welsh at home. So the case study there is of Victoria Primary, when, you know, sort of pupils were less engaged in a year 2 piece of work and task, where you see the teachers changed the focus and had some project work based on the theme of Beatrix Potter and creating Mr McGregor's garden. It's a pity really they don't have pictures to support that, because some of the work produced by the pupils was very imaginative there. And in terms of the improvement partner as well, they've been engaging with schools in relation to self-evaluation and quality assurance. And there's 2 examples there in terms of Oakfield Primary, where the improvement partner met with a group of year 2 pupils, and also the parents decided to join in the conversations as well there. And then in St Cyrus, and Pete might make reference to this later, the head teacher arranged for the improvement partner to be involved in a number of session observations, I think about a series of 12 or 13 in total, where the improvement partner visited the sessions alongside the head teacher and a member of the SLT. And then at the end of every session, they had professional dialogue with the teacher, focusing really on the activities undertaken in the lesson and pupils' progress within that lesson. So obviously we will get to hear and have a bit more flavour in terms of this report by the 2 presentations. But in terms of the next step, in terms of Central South Consortium, we'll continue to provide support and advice for schools across the region on blended learning and remote distance learning. And we will also continue to provide support to teachers to develop their skills and confidence. Improvement partners will also continue to support schools where appropriate in monitoring the quality of provision for blended learning and remote distance learning. And we will also continue to share effective practice. It's something we've got a weekly webinar in place where practice is shared across the region. And we've also got podcasts now, which also celebrate and share the good practice. So I'm very much aware that's very much going through the paper report. I think what you will find more interesting is to hear from the schools. So we've got 2 presentations here. So thank you very much to begin with for Kerry and Mike, the head and deputy of Wickham Macross, for agreeing to present, and also Peter from St Cyrus. So I'm going to pass over to begin with to Kerry and Mike in Wickham Macross. Diolch yn fawr.
Diolch, Caris. Before we even started, I just want to note my thanks to the team at WIC. If you just think of all the things you've heard Caris just say, that great big long list that has gone on of things that schools have been doing to support their families and to support their pupils. I know the team here, just as the teams right across schools in the Vale of Glamorgan, have been pouring their hearts and souls into ensuring that our families and our learners have been fully supported over the last 12 months. This evening we're going to share with you just a snapshot of our approaches that have been developed in WIC to remote and blended learning over the last year. Obviously you've heard a lot this evening as well about well-being, and that's exactly as it should be. Underpinning what you're hearing here is the decision that we made last March, that we were going to class every child in our school as a vulnerable child. And every family as a vulnerable family, because every child and every family was going through something that they'd never been through before. So for us, we didn't know what the outcomes were going to be for them. So our wellbeing work went alongside and sat and underpinned everything you're now going to hear about our approaches to blended, remote and face-to-face learning. It's been really difficult. Caris said I could have exactly 10 minutes. So it's been really difficult to condense our experiences of a year into 10 minutes, and especially being able to try and capture the learners' remote opportunities when you weren't actually in the lessons. So we tried to do that, and I've included just a couple of extracts for you as well. And we hope that we've been able to give you a taste of the journey at WIC and the opportunity to hear from different members of our school community. And I'm hoping that the wonderful Catherine now, because I didn't trust the internet connection at Wick, is going to press play for me somewhere beautifully.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, Kerry. I seem to be using the word inspirational quite a lot tonight, but it really was, you know, to see everything like that, your journey really for the last, for this academic year, isn't it, in terms of the progress, in terms of pupils, yourselves, and you work with the community as well. So thank you, diolch yn fawr iawn. I'll now pass over to Pete from St Cyrus, who was going to give a secondary perspective in terms of remote and blended learning. Diolch, Pete.
Thanks, Caris. And I'm just going to try and share my presentation with you, but I'm not sure how that's going to go. Looking at this, sorry, give me just 1 second.
Catherine may need to give you present.
Yeah, I'm just looking at that now. Yeah, are you able to do that, Catherine?
Anyone should be able to share, I think. Let me just double check. There's nothing here to say that you can't present. Just talk me through. Are you clicking the button next to the leave icon that says share content?
Yes, I am. Yeah, and it's just kind of going around in a circle at the moment.
Oh, okay. That does sound like it could be a connectivity thing. Are you able to send me the slides and I can share them on my screen?
It's actually a keynote. If you'd need a Mac, I guess, to do that.
Oh, probably not.
Right. Okay, I'm just going to press on then. It's a shame because I've got some lovely sort of imagery really, which I'm not going to be able to share, but I'll press on really. Okay, but look, you know, I wanted to kind of I was pleased when Caris asked me to have the opportunity really to talk to you about what we've done, and unfortunately I'm not going to be able to show you some of the stuff like the presentation you've just had, but I think there are some really common things that we've heard tonight which I'll pick up on, as well as you know, as well as some things that are perhaps a bit more unusual to a secondary school. So our approach to blended learning was very much, well, I don't know, I sort of unapologetically say we wanted to carry on as best as we could for our pupils, to carry on as normal really, because we were in anything but a normal time, and we wanted to give them the opportunity to try and engage with their learning as best we could, and as normal as we could. So we did nearly all of our delivery through live lessons. And we found that was very effective for our pupils from year 7 up to year 13, and also something that was very popular with our parents as well. And just to give you a little bit of context to our school, so we are a new build, as you know, sort of moved in 7 years ago in 2014, and using technology has been very much part of what we do actually on a day-to-day basis, even before COVID was even a word. So our pupils already have devices that are provided by the school. Okay, in our case, they're iPads. So we knew that when we looked at a model of live lessons, we knew that all of our pupils would be able to access that, because in other situations, we were aware that some families maybe had one laptop and the children all had to share. So if you did a live lesson, then it may be not a particular child's turn to use that. But because every pupil in our school had their own device from the school, and we've been doing this for 7 years, we were able to ensure that every time we run a live lesson, we knew that our pupils would be able to access that. So there were no concerns from that sort of equality side. And we were confident that no pupil would be left behind as a result of that. Okay, we were also able to support our ALN pupils through live lessons, and as the previous presentation, again, Google Classroom we've been using for more than 5 years. We would use Google Meets as our vehicle for live lessons, but Google Classroom in the background. And there were great examples of where LSAs who work one-to-one with pupils were in a separate Google Classroom as well as the main classroom, and those children were able to get the support they needed, which is really positive actually. And in terms of well-being, and I'm not going to talk too much about well-being because we know that was really important to us, but we felt that the best way that we could support well-being was to for the pupils to see their teachers regularly, to have that structure and routines that they would have when they were in school. But it also meant that our staff were able to check in on the pupils in their lessons in the way that they normally would, and there were some great examples of that. In terms of the actual lessons themselves, and I'll come on to this in a little bit, there was a lot of, we had to focus really on the sort of pace, challenge and interest really. We knew that if we didn't get that right, the pupils would not keep coming back really, and once we'd lost that was going to be harder to get back. So we really focused hard on what we were teaching them and making sure that they were enjoying that experience and it had real value to them. And because of that, we had very high levels of engagement, which we were really pleased with. I think the other approach in terms of live lessons was it allowed us to focus on the school priorities, regardless of the fact that we were doing this now remotely. So in terms of developing opportunities for literacy, numeracy, developing approaches to feedback and improving their own work, those sorts of skills which are fundamental to the work that we're doing within the school, we're all able to transfer to the online environment in a very positive way. So that was the sort of context. So it was a structure of live lessons over both lockdowns actually, and as I said, that was a really positive thing in terms of parents and pupils, because what we were finding with secondary age pupils and the experience of many is that once you lost the structure and routines of school, then children would go to bed too late, they were getting up too late, and they were becoming almost nocturnal. And we wanted to make sure that those structures, which are so important for young people, remained. So that was why we took that approach. But what I would say is, in order to do what we did, and I think this is really quite an important point, is that our journey on this started actually a long time ago, and I'm going back. Unfortunately, you can't see the timeline that I've got here, but back to June 2011, before about 2, maybe 3 years before we moved into this fabulous new build. And when we moved into a new school, as I guess every school that moves into a 21st century school, you want to make sure that what you're doing is 21st century teaching and learning, and we look carefully at the use of technology in learning back in 2011, and spent quite a lot of time around the vision and strategy. What do we want learning to look like, and how do we best support learning moving forward, and how are we going to engage young people and teenagers in their own learning really. And we spent a couple of years actually before we moved into this fabulous new site sort of doing that vision and strategy piece of work, and that sort of planning and engagement, which is really very important. And we started our journey as a sort of one-to-one iPad school in November 2014, and at that point every pupil has a school iPad, and that's part of their sort of core equipment for school. In our school, just as a pupil might get a pen, a ruler, a protractor, a compass, so it is with an iPad, and because an iPad for us is very important in that basic school equipment. And over a period of time from 2014, and I'll go through this quite quickly, but it is important to understand that you just can't switch this on overnight really, is that consolidating good practice, allowing staff to innovate, develop their own expertise, their own professional learning over a long period of time, and embedding that into our day-to-day practices in the school were really important to us. And we spent, we've been doing this, as I said, for 7 years. And all of a sudden, we got to March 2020, and we didn't quite know how we were going to transfer that into the virtual world. And, this was a period of adapting quite significantly for all of us. I would say that it was easier, I think, for us to adapt than most, because of that history of using technology in the way that we were using it. And people who know me know that I've been talking about the use of technology in learning for a long time, and opportunities for problem solving, collaborative skills, creativity, decision making, all of these really important skills for young people are supported by a clear strategy around using technology in learning, and I think that's been something that we've really focused on. Caris mentioned in her presentation the importance of training and professional development for staff, and for us that was important. Although we've been doing this for a long time, we weren't ever, none of this was planned around around remote learning and learning from home. What we didn't need at St Cyrie's was particularly supporting staff or pupils in what to click on or what software to use, because we've been using this for a long time. Look, Google Meet was quite new to us, but the rest of it was all pretty much embedded. So we focused our professional learning really around what I'm calling pedagogy rather than technology. So we didn't have sessions where we said to teachers, you need to load this bit of software or click on that button or do that or do the other. It was really about how you transfer the skill and the craft of teaching and learning that you have honed within a classroom environment into a virtual world. And I think they are really exciting discussions to be having, actually. And I think they're much more exciting discussions than saying click there and click there. So our discussions were about how we transfer our teaching and learning techniques into a virtual environment. I also feel very strongly, and I think, obviously you understand education, but, I would make this point that, we use Google Meet, but whether it's Google Meet or Teams or Zoom, that actually that's just an opportunity. That's just a vehicle for people to get together in a virtual room. And that's not, to me, what effective teaching and learning is like online. I suppose it's like saying a physical classroom. You could build a physical classroom, and it's just simply a place where an adult and a bunch of children meet. Okay, that's not effective teaching. So it's what you use on top of the basic tool of Google Meet or Zoom or Teams or whatever it is you're using. It's what tools you use on top of that support effective teaching and effective engagement with pupils. And I think sometimes people that gets lost on people because they just think that is the mechanism. That's nothing more than an opportunity to meet, in my view. So we spend quite a lot of time looking at tools that sit on top of Google Meet. We did a lot of things like the breakout rooms and allowing people's opportunities to work in small groups, just like we would in a normal classroom. We were trying to emulate as best as we could what people would do at home. So Google Meet Plus is what I would say, really, and it was all the tools that sit on top of Google Meet, I think, that really added value. And one thing that we did learn and we focused on in our professional development was about the importance of planning and planning online. Planning and teaching is important. Planning online is absolutely critical because things sometimes go wrong, as so my presentation has tonight. So you have to be able to adapt, and you have to make sure that you've got every base covered, really, in terms of your planning. I've got a lovely slide that you're not seeing now, but I am, in terms of feedback from parents, and I'm not going to read it out to you because I wasn't going to do it if you saw it, but we've had some amazing feedback on what we did. And we didn't go out looking for this, but it was just people who kind of write into us, really. But there was, really positive things being said from parents. There's a comment about, I think the presentation mentioned it just now, but even online live lessons of PE were really, really powerful here and so important as well. A parent here saying that, St. Cyrie's has done amazingly well to keep pupils engaged and motivated. I feel bad for others that aren't having the same experience of learning from home. I don't know what others are having necessarily. And the online learning has been outstanding. And this is, this is a parent saying, and it's kept important routines and structures with plenty of challenge. And I think that was really, really important with the pupils of the age group that I'm talking about, really. And yeah, lots of other compliments around blended learning, really, which has been really, really positive. And some of our parents, we have, maybe 3 or 4 children in the school from year 7 right up to year 13 have experienced, how our provision right across the school and across key stages. One parent's written here, these are such challenging times, yet St. Cyrie's School has worked tirelessly to offer the closest thing to face-to-face learning as possible. And that is what we did. That fundamentally underpins, really, I guess, the work that we were doing. And my favourite quote from a parent, which is the shortest one I had, but I'll read it to you, and it just says, it all feels seamless here. And that is what we were trying to do. We were trying to just transfer the school process through to an online process. So really that sort of captures our journey actually over quite a long time, which I know is not what you asked, but I do think that's quite important to understand that you know, this is not something that can be switched on overnight if you're going to do a really good job of it. In terms of my sort of final comments, really, you know, I would say this really in terms of the way forward. You know, my personal view is that we need a better strategic approaches to technology in schools. We are all aware of the sort of so-called digital divide that's been so prevalent in the lockdown periods. But you know, if a child is disadvantaged by the lack of technology, then they've been disadvantaged all of the time in education. They've been disadvantaged before COVID happened, and they've been disadvantaged now that we're back to some sort of normality. Okay, what COVID did is shone a light, and they were perhaps more disadvantaged. But if children are not accessing technology in 2021 in a way that will support their learning, whether that's in school or at home or everything in between, then I think, you know, we really need to be having those discussions around strategy and vision and planning. What do we want for learning in those schools? What do we want for technology in those schools? I think that's really important. I think we need a better understanding as well about how children learn through technology, and you can either pretend that that's not happening out there, or you can embrace it. And what we've done is we've embraced it. What we know, probably as most of us as adults, is if we want to know something, maybe to fix a light bulb in my car, then the first thing I'll do is I'll look on YouTube and I'll watch a video for it. That's what we do as adults. That's what children do, and we need to kind of harness that technology and understand that the world has moved on in terms of some of the things that children are doing in the way that they learn. And then I suppose the final point from me is I guess in terms of the way forward is we need to understand better. I think let's hope we're never in this position again. But effective online learning and pedagogy is a really interesting discussion to have, and my passion, I suppose, is not about. I love the technology, but it's what the technology allows us to do, and it's more about teaching and learning for me. And actually, the vehicle that we use is, you know, I guess. Less important, but what is important is you know, is that we can have effective learning going on in whichever approach we use. And actually moving forward, you know, blended is something that we really need to need to continue with. And as I said, that's why technology and access to technology is important for young people, whether we're in the lockdown period or whether we're not. That actually children need access to technology to support their learning. I think we need to be better at doing that. It's not about kit, I would say that. It's not about throwing laptops at people or iPads at people or anything like that. I think what's important is the vision and planning and understanding what it is you're trying to achieve with technology. And that actually is the bit that takes the time. So, you know, I'm very pleased with what we did. I'm very proud of actually what we've done. The feedback that we've had from parents has been good, and I think because we've tried to be good and honest in what we've tried to, the way we've tried to approach this. So I am very pleased and very proud of it. But this is part for us of a much longer journey than the journey that started in March 2020. Okay. Probably got a bit over there. I'm really sorry you didn't get to see the pictures, and perhaps what I'll do is I'll just put them as a PDF and send them through, because I've got some lovely imagery of some of our people's working and stuff. So I'm sorry you didn't get to see that, but I will try and find a mechanism to through Catherine perhaps to share those with you. If there are any questions, I'm very happy to take anything.
Oh, that would be great. Thank you, Peter. And sorry if apologies, you know, for the technology not working, but thank you very much for sharing your journey. Obviously a long journey over a period of time, but also posing questions and making us think about the future as well and the way forward in terms of remote and online learning. So diolch yn fawr. And can I just say, before we obviously go back to the chair and open for questions, just thank you to both of you actually. You know, so it's very hard, isn't it? And I'm sorry for the 10-minute time scale, but it's very hard in that to cover everything, but I think we've had a good flavour in terms of what's happened in schools tonight. So diolch yn fawr iawn.
Okay, thank you very much. It's very unfortunate, of course, when we're talking about, we've got a report that deals with technology when technology fails, isn't it? But no, well, hopefully you can arrange something that we can see what you were going to show us this evening. But again, thank you all very much. I've got two people who have indicated to speak. Firstly, Councillor Thomas and then Trevor Baker. So Neil, over to you first.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, can I echo your thanks to both yours and Keris's. Thanks to both Wick and Sarah's for their presentations. They're both very interesting and quite engaging. I understand Mr. Lewis's comments about technology and so on. I'm sure Trevor will be able to enlighten us when he talks to us in a few minutes about the distribution of the hardware and also how well loaded with software that's that is appropriate. In terms of live learning and so on, I'm particularly live learning online. I'm very keen to see this, but I'm partly because one of my concerns is the kids whose attendance is poor and how that's affecting both the school's record keeping, because there's going to be implications in terms of on attendance is one of the things that's looked at, and from the figures that we've been hearing tonight, it sounds as though attendance might be an issue. But I'm particularly concerned about the children whose attendance and engagement is so poor that we should be having concerns about them and how that's being addressed. The kids that are absolutely point blank saying, I'm not going to be doing this, and whether there's any of that going on, or whether it may not be an issue, but I have a sense that it might be. So yeah, there's basically the three things. One is attendance, one is engagement and making sure the kids' welfare, and the ones who are at risk or vulnerable are being monitored sufficiently so that we know if there are possibly, well, we've all heard that there's an increase in abusive behaviour during lockdown, and making sure that we're picking up on that and the bit about the technology. Thank you very much.
Sorry about that. I suddenly realised I was muted. Thank you for that, Neil. Trevor?
Shall I give a quick update on the technology side of things, just for members to be up to date? I have to say, I really enjoyed those presentations from the heads. It's really insightful. It's really good to see the variation in terms of methodology that's being used across the different schools and the way it's bespoke for those families, for those kids. And hopefully, that's reflected in what we've done from a technology standpoint. And the bit that Pete mentions about access to these tools, it isn't about the functional device that's in front of you. That's a doorway to learning. But of course, without the door, you're not going to go anywhere. So in terms of getting the technology out there as an update, I mean, I can give you an update today. We've done over 7,500 end user devices which have gone out to learners across the Vale. So what that means, that's a 3-to-1 device ratio of brand new kit for our pupils. And of course, how that kit gets used, is different. You wouldn't use 1-to-1 in the foundation phase you might in high school. So on average, that's quite a good outlay. That doesn't take into account the existing kit that's already out there, which is another few thousand devices. So in terms of being able to access learning remotely, we've come a long way, certainly in the last 18 months, which will hopefully widen access for those kids who might not have had it previously. That goes for broadband as well. So you've heard me talk about the wireless broadband functionality that we've been able to give out. There are some legacy opportunities for families, I guess you would say, following this. So there are some national telcos who are doing specific deals for ESM families, for example, to make sure that in the longer term, because yes, hopefully, fingers crossed, COVID is starting to go away and things start to reopen, but we don't want to go back, as the heads have said, to where we were previously and taking away that access to technology. So those opportunities are forthcoming as well. We're now reaching the next stage of the hub program, and we're looking at devices and teaching and learning tools in the classroom. So, you know, the information about the flipped classroom, the blended learning, that's so important, because it isn't you're either in the classroom or you're at home. It's about using these devices across that broad spectrum. So it's things like large format displays, charging devices, monitors, headphones for accessibility, tools for visual impairments, all of those sorts of things which are going to enable more access to this stuff, regardless of whether you're at home, whether you're in school, or whether you're somewhere in between. So the work is ongoing. And again, you know, shout out and love to all the heads who have been really engaged with this process with us, because, you know, the point's been clear today. It's one thing to get the technology into the school. It's a whole other thing to make it useful and valuable in terms of the learning that these kids receive. And that's been demonstrated here tonight.
Okay, thank you for that, for Trevor. Are there any more questions? Any more comments? No? Okay, then if we can look at the, well, I'm not sure about the recommendation. It says members consider the findings. Well, I'm assuming we've considered the findings. And I think really we should probably just note the approaches that have developed through the schools, and thank everyone for their efforts. I think that's very important, because it was very interesting to read the report and look at all the various aspects of it, and to hear particularly what's happening. So, are members happy if we amend the recommendation slightly, just to say that?
Yes, very happy indeed.
Okay, thank you all very much. Well, and can I particularly thank at this point Caris for all her efforts. I think it seemed like it was you'd taken over the meeting at one point, but it was very, very interesting, and I'm sure we all appreciate the effort you and those from the schools have put into this. So again, thank you very much.
Yeah, we all second that.
Okay, thank you. If we move on then to agenda item 6, which is Cardiff and Vale Test Trace Protect Service supporting ethnic minority communities.
Good evening, Chair. Good evening, Committee. I'll introduce that one if that's okay with you.
Oh, yes.
Thanks very much indeed, Councillor Kemp. This is a report at the request of a member of the Corporate Performance and Resources Committee who wanted us to bring you some information about the work that we've been doing with our communities on public health matters over the last couple of years, especially focused in terms of the coronavirus pandemic. And this report is purely on the basis of the Test, Trace, Protect service, because I think it's one of the best possible examples of where we've been working collaboratively in partnership with the UHB, with Public Health Wales, the 2 local authorities and other public sector partners to actively engage with ethnic minority communities to promote access to COVID testing and vaccinations. I'm really proud of this work. Rob Jones, who's our communications manager, has been leading on this for the region as a whole, and he's going to take you through a bit of a summary in terms of the work. And the importance, I suppose, here is that this is making massive difference right now, but it also gives us a legacy in terms of our approaches and different networks and methods to engage with people going into the future. So it's a really, really important piece of work. So with your permission, Chair, I'll hand over to Rob, who's just going to run us through a brief summary of the work that he's been up to.
Excellent, thank you. Thanks, Tom, for that introduction, and thank you, Chair and Committee, for considering this evening. I'm going to try my luck with sharing my screen now, and we'll see how far that takes me. It looks like this might be working for me. There we go. It's got to be a good start, hasn't it? Yes. So as Tom said, this is really the work that's being carried out by a range of partners across the region. I'll probably use the term we a lot in a very broad sense, and that would encompass the work of us as the Vale of Morton Council, also Cardiff Council, the Health Board, Public Health Wales, and a range of other partners. Members will have seen in the scrutiny report that goes through under background papers, there's a link through to a SWAY presentation, which offers a whole load of detail on the work of the ethnic minority subgroup under TTP over the course of the last year. What I've sought to do in the presentation that I've got up on the screen now is just pull out the highlights of that, which is what I'm going to run through. As always, it's probably best practice to begin at the beginning, and just to give you a little bit of context for how this programme of work began. It was a real big consideration for the regional TTP operations board and how we would engage with Black and minority ethnic communities. Right from the outset, there was a lot of national research available around this time last year suggesting that particularly within ethnic minority communities, there was a low level of awareness around the risks and broader issues relating to COVID-19, as well as a higher level of sort of disinformation in circulation. That was obviously a much more acute issue for us across the Vale and Cardiff, because the region's got one of the most ethnically diverse populations in Wales. It was a very clear priority then to be able to successfully reach these communities with the public health messaging and initially the advice and guidance around how to access or how and when to access testing for COVID-19. A work stream was set up to consider that. That work stream then went on to become a sort of more formal subgroup, and it's that work that I'm going to give a sort of whistle-stop tour of now. It started, and this is really the platform on which everything was then built, with a really detailed sort of community mapping exercise. Now, this was led by the Vale's Refugee Resettlement Coordinator, who works across both the Vale and Cardiff. And what was done here was a really detailed mapping exercise, not just of the various ethnic minority communities across the Vale and Cardiff, but also sort of community links within those. So either individuals or organisations that were known to have good links there. There's a really important point here around when this was being considered this time last year. There was a lot of talk around, well, how are we going to engage with sort of hard to reach groups, and kind of a principle for us running through this was that was the wrong way to look at this as an objective. That term hard to reach, I think, suggests some responsibility on these individuals or these communities for not coming to where our messaging is. We very much wanted to approach this from a way of, well, you know, the responsibility lay with us to go and put information in front of people, and we wanted to try and do that obviously in the most effective way that we could. And so we decided to try and build a network from the ground up, hence trying to find those sort of community contacts at the start. It's something that quickly grew and grew and grew, and when it was initially finalised, if that's not a bit of a contradiction, I say that because it was revised many times since, we'd had 74 individuals or groups across the Vale and Cardiff that we knew to have good links into communities. They were going to be our sort of trusted messengers, if you like, to the communities that we wanted to reach. 74 was a lot of people to try and get around even a digital table. So we pulled some key partners out of that. That group then became the subgroup. And it was a group through which primarily we sought to get feedback on some of the ideas that we were coming up with, and really approach everything that we then produced in terms of the communications materials in the spirit of co-production. So working with advocates for these communities to help us understand what would be the most effective ways of getting these really important messages across. What came out of that initially, some really valuable feedback that this very much was a campaign that needed to be digitally led. What we heard from lots of people was that, yes, while people might not necessarily consume sort of Welsh media or UK media, they might not necessarily be coming to the social media feeds or the websites of statutory organisations. These are, of course, people that, because it's 2020, or it was 2020 then, everyone has a smartphone. That's how people communicate. So it was very much around how can we produce content that's easily shareable, something that's shareable into WhatsApp groups, into Facebook Messenger groups, the sort of places where communities in lockdown were still meeting.
Rob, can I very quickly interrupt and ask if you could take that full screen, just because the text's a little bit small? Just for the benefit of the recording afterwards, sorry. That's the one. Thank you so much.
Has that one done it for you?
That's perfect. Thank you.
Excellent. Yeah, so that was our starting point, producing content in that sort of digital format. Again, based all on the feedback that we were getting from the subgroup, we approached it in two ways of getting that out. Firstly, we did some quite broad brush paid for online campaigns. So particularly at the stage where we were trying to push access to testing and the local testing sites that had been established, we did a lot of online marketing that was done on a postcode basis. So looking at the data which informed us areas of the Vale and Cardiff where people within the communities we were trying to reach were most likely to live. We were able to do targeted online posts there. And as we moved through autumn and then into winter of last year, we gradually built up a bigger and bigger library of resources to use. So we got some really important feedback quite early on that in many cases, people were looking for almost a blend between sort of verbal content, that reassuring sort of spoken word messaging, but that could be delivered online. So we started looking at developing some sort of short form video pieces with talking heads. And again, based on what people were telling us, we selected, or we went out and managed to find sort of health professionals that were well-known figures within some of the communities we wanted to speak to sort of front up these pieces. They were produced in a really wide range of languages, hosted on YouTube, but also available for everyone within our network to share. Those proved really effective in breaking down some of those initial misconceptions around testing and what would happen if you tested positive, etc. That proved really useful. And as that initial work established, I guess, some of the mechanisms that we'd put in place as sort of credible, as trusted links into communities, we were able then to start disseminating some of the national campaigns that were being run as well. And you can see examples on the screen of the Welsh Government campaigns and Public Health Wales campaigns that we were able to then share and put these things in front of people who probably would not otherwise have ever seen that information. And the theme that I'd like to think that runs through all of the work that we did is really, we realised quite early on that there were actually a huge number of people out there, dozens, if not hundreds of people across the region who were already actively trying to do this sort of work within their communities. There were people who cared passionately about either the area they lived or the people that they had sort of cultural or social links to. They were trying to achieve the same objective that we were. They were always going to be a much more credible and trusted messenger than a statutory organisation is. So we sought to, wherever possible, sort of identify these people, partner with them, and then kind of just lean in behind whatever it was that they were doing. And there's obviously resources that we've got capacity that we had across the partnership that we were able to make available to. So you can see an example on the screen of for a while we were able to help support get a lot of sort of community level sort of webinars really up and running. So where there were community groups where the people that led them knew there were sort of misconceptions in circulation, we were able to find public health practitioners that would be able to go and speak in these forums. We were able to use sort of our design capacity and some of our sort of digital marketing skills to help them better promote those events. And those became then really effective vehicles for the messages that we needed to get out there. And that sort of principle of, as I say, sort of leaning in behind wherever we could, really sort of paid dividends in this as the project went on. It was very much testing, symptoms, access to testing that was our focus to start with, and that changed very sharply around the turn of the year. we'd run a series of a very regular series of sort of engagement events with community leaders. Obviously, the rollout of the vaccine started in December, and not long after that, there was an event at which I think everyone really sat up and took notice of the strength of the feedback we were getting from almost all of the community leaders there, around some of the myths and misconceptions around the vaccine and how sort of deeply embedded these were already within some communities. Now, we were very fortunate, I suppose, that at this point we'd identified a very acute need to get a lot of information out very quickly, obviously on a very important topic. And we had 3 or 4 months of learning that we could go to. We had mechanisms that were in place that we knew would really work, and we were able to bring all that to bear then in support of the UHB's mass vaccination programme. And having sort of tested some of these mechanisms already, with this being a higher profile issue, we were able to work with some slightly larger kind of national level organisations. So then, as well as working with local health practitioners, we were working with organisations like Muslim Doctors Cymru and the Muslim Council of Wales, which allowed us then to sort of broaden the reach of this, yet again, a campaign that spoke to even more people. And as that progressed, we in turn built more links into communities, more ways in which to push this information out there. And we started then to branch off into, as well as having a sort of digitally focused campaign, as we were able to identify more sort of teams across partners who were working in communities, who were speaking to people every day. We started to then produce printed materials that would be quite an effective way of almost, kind of leaving a physical message in a place so that it can be referred back to over and over again. Again, all based on the feedback we were getting from the community links that we'd made about sort of what would work. So as Tom said, it is a piece of work that was very fast paced, but we think has achieved a lot over a fairly short space of time, and we think now has real legacies in terms of both how we work across the region and how we'll be able to work now within the Vale of Glamorgan. And in the short term, the subgroup's going to continue to support the response to the pandemic, and it's increasingly aligned with the work of the mass vaccination programme. There's a very clear sort of public health legacy here. I think we've built an effective way of putting information out, having conversations with, getting feedback from people that perhaps as a broad public sector we might have struggled in the past. So there's an obvious legacy in terms of carrying that on, but more importantly, in terms of the work that I think we'll look to do now within the Vale of Glamorgan Council in the future, I think everything that we've learned from this in terms of ways of working is very applicable. I think we've learned a lot about the importance of having that in-depth understanding of communities before you seek to message them too heavily. That's not a slightly jargonistic way to talk about speaking to people. We've also learned, I think, about the value and the importance of having sort of effective conduits for this information, for having trusted messengers, for having people who are credible talk to their community, and the way that if we approach things in the spirit of partnership and co-production, we can develop advocates for the work that we're trying to do, for some of the things that we're trying to achieve as a council. And I think it is underlined for me, and I know a lot of people that have worked on this, what should always be a sort of a real fundamental of communications, which is the importance of testing messages, the importance of having a forum to which you can take information, take packages of work, take marketing materials, whatever that may be, so you can go out with those with the confidence that they're going to work, that they're going to achieve your desired end. So yeah, that's it. That's a sort of potted history of how This has progressed over the past year, and I think what we've learned from it, both as a region and as an organisation. I'm not sure if Tom wants to add anything else at this point, but if not, I'm happy to take any questions on anything that I've either skipped over too quickly or omitted altogether.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And you don't wish to add anything, Tom?
No, I think Rob has done a really good and comprehensive job of describing it. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, yeah, it was very detailed, and you know, when you read the report as well. Does anyone have any questions? No. Oh, hang on. I've got two. I've got Councillors Burnett and Thomas. If I start off with the Cabinet member.
I was just going to comment. What a lot of people wouldn't know is that both Rob and Tom have been doing a tremendous amount of work regionally. A lot of the communication outcomes that you're seeing, Rob has been very modest in not saying that an awful lot of that work was down to him. And he's been doing a lot of work right across South Wales. Tom has become Mr. Numbers. I mean, you see him talking about policy, talking about performance, talking about Project Zero, and it seems to be in every single scrutiny. But at the same time, he's also been in virtually every regional meeting, number crunching. And when I yesterday said to him, do you know exactly what our position was like, case-wise and instance-wise, in the last week of November? I got an answer back within about 15 minutes. So an awful lot of this actually is down to these two in terms of the success of it. But I would like to comment that while we're in a position of saying, you know, what do we need to do to increase figures out, to increase our performance, because that's what we do all the time, isn't it? We say, how can we get better? I think we have to recognise, I was just looking at today's vaccination figures. I mean, even in over 65s, we're over 90% with their second dose. If we look at age 18 to 29, you know, this is right down to 18, across Wales, and Cardiff and Vale are actually better than that, we're at a higher level, 62% of people of 18 to 29 have had their first dose. So we're looking at how we increase, how we improve. And in terms of the TTP programme, with, again, the phenomenal impact of NHS, Public Health Wales, local authorities all working together, the way in which we've been able to track and follow up people. And this work is an extra part of, and how can we reach those people that we find it more difficult to get to? And I think it's been a phenomenal strategy, and certainly my huge thanks publicly to both of you and to your teams as well. It's been a phenomenal piece of work.
Thank you, Neil.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I wanted to say some stuff that's similar to what Liz has just said, so I will echo what she said and thank both Robert and Tom and their various teams for all the amazing work they've been doing. I mean, Liz is quite right about the vaccine rollouts here and the TTP and the success rate we've had, particularly in Cardiff South and in Cardiff and the Vale. And across Wales nationally, and we are now noted as being the best or the highest in the world, I think, at the moment for vaccinating. And I think the entire NHS in Wales needs to be congratulated on that. The question I have, though, for both is, there is still an element of anti-vax about and the misinformation that's being put out that we know is around, particularly in social media, that is, a lot of it is targeted at ethnic minority communities, and it is amazingly resistant to logic. We know that from the QAnon type stuff they've got in America and the studies that have been done on that. And here we have sadly we have QAnon types here, and the people that are willing to believe the misinformation that's being put out year after year after year, and the resistance, because if you talk about, well, actually, it's really like this, that suddenly becomes government propaganda, and that's part of the conspiracy. It feels like a battle that can't be won. How are we getting over that, please?
And if you like, I'll start, and then Rob can pitch in. I think that highlights, Councillor Thomas, the importance of those credible community leader voices that Rob was describing. So actually taking messages out and into settings where different communities are listening to people and trust people and giving them the message, and working with them to do that in a way that that best suits them. I think it was very kind, Councillor Burnett's comments, and thank you very much, because it has been a real pleasure and an incredible learning curve working on vaccination and TTP. And there are some practical things as well that our health board colleagues are doing, where, for example, they're taking vaccinations into different settings. So Rob mentioned some of the faith settings where vaccinations have taken place, and also offering the opportunity to drop in and have a confidential conversation with somebody that may or may not alleviate some concerns, but gives you some truth and some reality, and then offers you the opportunity to have the vaccine if you're comfortable in taking it. So it's one of those things that I think we've taken a very positive approach to. So we've sought to bust some myths, but we've also sought to take out the positive message to those community leaders and work with them to do that. So I don't know if there's anything else you want to add there, Rob.
I think that's the key element of the strategy there you've picked up on, Tom, which is around using those sort of credible community leaders to demonstrate that there is no basis to some of those myths. Tom's touched on the work that was done around vaccinations within some mosques and other faith centres. As part of that, we knew there was quite a deep-seated misconception around there being animal products within some of the vaccines. Which was tackled, we think, effectively by actually capturing sort of pictures and video of imams being vaccinated and some other notable community figures, which they were then in turn able to sort of play back to groups that they were linked into as a very visible demonstration that there was no sort of faith basis on which you should decline the vaccine. We know that there's also there are a lot of misconceptions around impact on fertility, which is obviously something that impacts younger people. So there's a sort of national strategy which is being led by Welsh Government, but we're supporting locally to bust that by leading very strongly with the sort of scientific evidence that underpins the use, particularly of the Pfizer vaccine with younger people. It's a really interesting work, the sort of myth busting or tackling misinformation. There's a regional comms network that has grown out of this work, that's working with a sort of Welsh Government appointed misinformation expert. Which is an unfortunate job title, but he genuinely does know his stuff, and so that printed materials campaign that I mentioned briefly in there, one of the key objectives of that is to have so when we've got link workers or other sort of community level workers working for the statutory, the public sector partners, when they find themselves having a conversation with someone who might be repeating some of these myths or misconceptions, they have something in their, in their hand, in their briefcase, in their bag there and then that they can sort of leave as a very visible point of information to push people towards more credible, accurate information. And so there are QR codes, etc., on it that they can then scan through to find the right material online. So it's trying to understand exactly what the myths are and then take a very targeted approach at addressing those. It's a lengthy piece of work, obviously, because these are quite deep-seated concerns. But I know there's already anecdotal evidence coming through, for example, from the walk-in vaccination sessions that are happening in Cardiff Bay of people who previously didn't take up their appointment to have the vaccine didn't take it up when it was offered to them because they had a concern, they were hesitant for some reason, and information that they've seen in the time since has addressed that, and they're now keen to get jabbed. So hopefully that's evidence that approach is working.
Thank you, Councillor Norman. Jane, if you want to introduce.
Just a quick question to Rob. Do we have any breakdown of the age groups that are most resistant to having the vaccine? Is it the older age group, the younger age group, people in between? Have we any breakdown of these figures, or is it just a general overall figure?
No, that breakdown does exist. I'll try and do the double act in reverse now, I think, and say something and then hand over to Tom, who, as Councillor Burnett said, is very much the number cruncher extraordinaire on these sorts of things. Yeah, that breakdown does exist, and I think analysis is now being done to look at it on an age profile, an ethnicity profile, and a geographical one as well. I think looking at both take up of initial appointments and then the DNA rate, so people who don't attend, and then people who actually actively opt out of receiving the vaccine.
That's the spot on answer, Rob. And if it's useful for committee, what we can do via Kath in the morning is circulate the latest breakdown by the different age groups or the different JCVI groups, so you can see, starting with the group 1, and we're obviously vaccinating group 10 now, which is the 18 to 49-year-olds, but we can show you exactly the numbers who've had the first and the second doses by those different groups, and I can send that through to Democratic Services in the morning for you, Councillor. And
does this equate then with the ethnic minority groups as well?
That's the piece of work that that Rob was referring to, that we're starting to look at that aspect. Sometimes the records that I think the health service system uses doesn't record ethnicity in all cases, so sometimes we have a subset of people that we have the ethnicity data for, but it certainly can highlight, as Rob says, both ethnicity where it's been identified on a patient record, but certainly geography, and some of that we can then triangulate with some of the data that we have about the kind of demographic profiles in different areas to draw some conclusions as well.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you all very much for that. I think it was it's an interesting report, and you know, again, echo the thanks for the work you've both done as far as this is concerned. The recommendations, as far as the first one is concerned, perhaps we simply say that we note the work and then make the 2 referrals that are in the agenda, that are in recommendations 2 and 3. Are members happy with that?
Yes.
Happy with that.
Okay, thank you very much. And we'll now reach, let's say, the first half I mentioned as to who dominated that, and Tom seems to be dominating this one. So, Tom, I'll refer to you now for the for agenda item 7.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. And now for something completely different. This is the annual Welsh language monitoring report. Committee will be aware that we brought this to you in the autumn of last year, and I committed at that point to bringing it earlier or closer to the end of the financial year for which the report refers. So this is the 2020-2021 annual report. We're required to produce this annual report by the Welsh language standards. It's part of demonstrating how we've gone about complying with those standards. And the report that you've got this evening, Chair, has got 2 appendices. One which is the annual report. The second is the promotion strategy, the strategy for the organisation over a 5-year period to promote the use of Welsh, both internally within the council, but more importantly, widely across the Vale Morgan as an area. We're bringing this to you prior to it going to Cabinet, so as to give members the opportunity to consider the contents and make any comments before Cabinet consider this. So the annual report itself describes what obviously was a significantly different year in terms of everybody's work. So there's more of an emphasis than in previous years on digital opportunities. The report highlights some of the key developments around communications, customer service, training and collaboration work that has been underway, and it also gives members an update in terms of the specific actions that we were required to take in order to implement and then comply with the standards. So you'll see within the body of the report there's a series of updates about that work. We're required as well to report some performance indicators, things like the number of complaints associated with the Welsh language. So the report considers that, and then also reflects the priorities for the forthcoming year, which are predominantly around the recruitment of further Welsh language speaking colleagues, encouraging existing staff to either begin to learn Welsh or to become more confident in their existing Welsh language skills, and an ongoing commitment to promoting the use of the Welsh language across the county. The second appendix, which is the promotion strategy, as I said, that's a 5-year document. This report refers to year 4, so a key element of work of my team this year will be in working to refresh that and produce a new 5-year strategy for next year. And what that does is break down our work into a number of different policy areas. So we look at Welsh learning by adults, children and families, community activities, Welsh in the workplace, and we look at the specific things that we can do in those policy areas, either as a local authority or definitely in partnership. And I'd like to take the opportunity to say thank you to colleagues in Learn Welsh in the Vale and Mentor Brum Morgannwg, who have been absolutely incredible over a number of years, but especially in the last year in supporting what has been a very different way of working. So you'll see how we go about working in partnership in order to promote the use of the Welsh language. So the purpose, Chair, of bringing these reports, as I say, is to give you the opportunity to consider any comments and refer those on to Cabinet, and that would allow us to meet the statutory reporting deadline of the 30th of June to publish the annual report.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Does any member have any questions or comment? Councillor Hodges, Nick.
Hello, thank you, Chairman. Hi, Tom. Good report, plenty of information as usual, and it's nice to see how things are progressing, even though, of course, we've all had this mad 15 months, which has really messed us all about. But there's one thing in the promotion strategy I'd like to ask about, point 3.5, which goes on about the Welsh Language Centre, or potential Welsh Language Centre, and it's just got a comment on there that this aim and area of activity is currently subject to discussion. Seek funding and carry out a feasibility study by September 2018, and I was just wondering if we know of anything, and if this is now going to go up to Cabinet, perhaps it's something that they need to progress a bit more strongly if possible. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Hodges. I can certainly undertake to find out a little bit more information, and if committee obviously are going to make a comment in terms of that particular question or action rather to Cabinet, I'll make sure that the information is provided as an update to your committee, Chair, but also available to the Cabinet member for the meeting when they consider it as well.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think the problems to some extent with it, it's a very good report, but obviously some of the things are quite historic in a way. You know, I was looking at the what's it, standard 170 brackets to a number of staff with Welsh skills. Well, of course, the figures we've got go back to some 2.5 years ago now, and it'd be very interesting to see how that has changed over those 2.5 years. So you say you're going to do a further audit this year. Do you know when, or is that underway at the moment?
The skills linguistics audit will be a really important piece of the evidence base for the next iteration of the promotion strategy, Chair. So yes, you're absolutely right. What the action plan does is give an update in terms of complying with the standards implementation. So that is relatively historic in the action plan for the council now, because obviously lots of this is business as usual now that the standards are firmly embedded. But the linguistic skills audit is something that will be looking to undertake now over the next quarter or so, in order to then provide us with some information that we can then build into that promotion strategy to start next year.
And obviously it'd be interesting to see, well, not just interesting, but very important to see how that has changed over those 2.5, 3 years. But presumably you'll be, and I apologise if this was indicated originally, but there's mention of 122 members of staff out of 1,572 responses, but how that compares with the figures for the Vale overall? You know, do our percentages match the percentages in the Vale as a whole, or are we lower, higher, you know, whatever? I suspect probably lower, I would think, than the figures.
I'm going to disappoint now, Chair, in terms of my my ability to do statistics quickly. But the census that indicated about 21% of the Vale of Glamorgan residents have some Welsh language skills. That wouldn't be borne out by that number of the ratio of council staff, but it does importantly highlight why we need to refresh that that information. And I'm aware that we are going to do some work in terms of refreshing the profile of staff that's going to be led by the head of HR and OD, and I think this is an opportunity to bring the two things together to get a bit of a feel for that in the next few months.
Okay then, thanks. Well, unless anyone else got any comments, as far as the recommendations are concerned, I think we've noted the contents of the report. That's straightforward. Then refer it onto cabinet, and perhaps we can raise the issue in that refer on to cabinet, the matter that Nick raised, and then perhaps, I don't know, I'm tempted to say that we recommend to cabinet that Tom Bowery increases his statistical skills, but I think that's probably unfair, so we'll leave that out perhaps.
Diolch, Chair.
And I'm sorry, but I got to be honest. I like figures myself, you know, and I like statistics. And but yeah, I'm sure we'll see the comparisons when the next report comes out and things are updated. So again, committee happy that we those two recommendations.
Yes, very happy. Yep.
Thank you very much. Well, that I've got no items under agenda item 8. There are no part 2 items. So can I thank everyone for their attendance? It's been a fairly long meeting tonight, but I think we've got a lot out of it. I think we've gained a lot. The information we have has been very good, and I'd like to thank all the officers, and particularly those from the schools, because I think they've contributed fantastically to the success of this meeting, and I'm hoping we can see more from the schools in the future. So thank you all very much.